All right. So today I want to talk about some serious things that maybe not many people will know about. Um, there is nothing related with this that you will find about, as far as I know, people who is or has been neurotarget. This includes the victims of gang stalking, which I spoke before what might be that phenomenon, but it's not related to any of the videos that I've seen online. It's probably more mind-blowing technologically wise, victims of Havana syndrome, etc. So one of the things that happened recently for which I discovered that I might be or I am autistic is um, because this technology somehow strengthens certain circuits in my brain that are related with concept or language, and these circuits has been related with racism. So let's say every time I try to let's say I see someone who is Caucasian, the first thing that I think is that I don't see anything but a person. I mean, I don't think that the person is white. I did not have concept of whiteness. I did not have that concept. Um, I would refer to, let's say, what would be very clear skin like myself, like Caucasian, but of course I'm Latin, yeah? I get tan during the summer. But I will not have this idea of, let's say, gringo. I will sometimes say gringo, but I will always think it's despective, so it depends of the context, but I never use it in a despective way. Rather, I will try to not use it. And also, let's say I will not refer to any color that will be white, thinking about in racist terms or black or anything like that. I will sometimes will make jokes related with, I don't know, let's say the N word, but I mean, it's like when you're Latin and when you are among friends who are black, this is not an issue. But I never thought, let's say, indiscriminated racist ways in which, let's say, I could ever refer or I even identify before. But then this is the point. This technology is able to directly change the neuroplasticity of your brain. This is not about inducing certain words and maybe reinforce those concepts of words. This is about creating neuroplasticity. This is technically rewiring the brain, as you will rewire, let's say, change the data in a USB. Yeah, this is serious because how long does it take to beam a concept or rewire a concept and then create the reinforcement of that concept? So then it's simple as technically one day I woke up having those concepts in my mind. I used to know I didn't distinguish between symbols of animals. I will not use to distinguish any kind of, let's say, racist view of the world. So it makes me think that a lot of racist people are not racist because they were racist, but because they were not aware of their concepts, and then some concepts were induced in them. So it technically means that it's probable that, as let's say, the main kind of rhetoric about anti-immigration is happening in the West, and the main rhetoric about discrimination, etc., anti-immigrant policies is coming from the West, and mainly all this wave of right-wing and extreme right-wing parties that swap in Europe, etc. So most of their policies of these politicians blame those small groups in society, and these small groups, according with them, are responsible for most of the problems of the society. So then we have a situation in which the most powerful people blame the most vulnerable people, and in that way usually means that power is not visible, has no accountability, and we have seen that before in history. So that's why in another videos I refer to this as fascism. So another thing that this technology does is to push you not only racism, but kind of, well, what it does to me is that it brings the word pedophilia, yeah? But I'm not ashamed to kind of report this because I think it's extremely important, as many people might have experienced this, or they might not understand where this, not even thoughts, but in my case, it's the word. And then they will push that word. And obviously, the more they push it, the more associations you create. But I've been battling that pretty good because it's simply not how I think. Plus, I'm risking that people might not understand this, but I think in my situation it is important to report this because the failure of not doing it could be worse than me not doing it. So then it means that it's possible that they also are creating or deviating the sexuality of people in manners that no one wants in society. So, well, I know that it's possible for them to change and being these thoughts and neurons in that way. One second. Yeah, I need to talk about something else. So then it means that a lot of people could be induced fear, could be induced doubt, could be induced to certain paths where they don't want to go. So then a lot of people that might look victimaries are actually victims. And I refer again to the Bondi massacre because the description of what happened to this person who killed 6 people was situationally identically or almost identical of what happened to me. Yeah. So it's likely that this person was targeted by this technology. It's likely that this person was not aware of what's going on to him. Most likely this person did not know about the potential of, let's say, technological advances like electromagnetic waves, certain phenomena of it, and artificial intelligence, etc. So then we have that it's likely that this person will spend a fair amount of time in social media, and it's likely that he was hearing voices. It has been reported that he left his medication and he was not affected, or let's say thriving in society without the medication, but probably he was not aware of what was going on to him. And this technology, as far as I know, uses a lot of humiliation and a lot of different words. So one way in which you will guide society is to choose the meaning of words and their rhetoric. And what this technology also does is not only to introduce certain words, but play with that meaning in such a way that you will dissociate or create more meanings. And I used to always think in a literal form. That's why I know that I am autistic, because most of the time I used to think in a literal form. Now I'm able to catch sometimes more subtle, let's say, kind of language, but I still working in that. So this is autism, what used to be called like kind of Asperger's or functional autism or whatever. I mean, for me it's not a problem, as it's not for Elon Musk. Technically, autism becomes a way to say socially unadjusted, because you are supposed to not live to the social conditioning of most of the people. And most of the people, being socially more sensitive, will prime others than themselves if they don't have the cognitive tools to develop their own personality under their own judgment. So they will be influenced and succumb to the force of influence and other symbols that are in society. So then the symbols are imposed and are not created by the person, which limits the language in such a way that you cannot interpret the reality as it is, but as it has been imposed to you. Then several words are related with racism, with humiliation, and recently are related with toxic masculinity. So that's something that also changed recently. So it's more about, I've been having certain, let's say, improvements in my health, for which I've been, let's say, doing more exercise and things like that. People might think, oh, maybe it's related with hormones. So no, no, because I mean, there are words that simply I used to not have, yeah? And there are words that are, let's say, induced, especially when I'm around women. And I also think that this is important because, if I'm right, being this technology, kind of old technology, but lately refined every week, it is important to acknowledge two things. That it's possible that, since many of my thoughts can be read, it's very likely that the intelligence community, or whoever have access to this kind of, let's say, thought processing that I have, might interpret wrongly the situation in which I am, because they might have not known who I was, or who I am, or who, or what was my thought process before. So they might not be able to distinguish what is the old Daniel, what is the new Daniel, what is Daniel, what is induced, what is not induced. Because if you have a technology in which whatever I say will be, let's say, beamed to someone else, or will be just collected for someone else to be interpreted, then the risk is eventually what is happening, that sometimes I don't bring that output as a thought output. It is reproduced without, let's say, my consent and also my will, in which it will simply be beamed, and then it might be as well taken as and reproduced to other systems. And on the technical side, maybe some technicians, some developers can check that eventually the output comes from my brain, but they might not know that that output is created by an input that is not coming from my brain. So this might be just knowledge for a few small teams that might exist somewhere in the world, but in the future all this will eventually makes perfect sense, because most of the people doesn't know how this technology works, and this is not magic still. Yeah, this is totally, let's say, engineering reversible. So then we have that. That's why I think it's an old kind of technology, because it's not that advanced. What is advanced is the computing power and the refinement of the, let's say, AI models. So then what is the situation if, let's say, the secret services will continue using this technology? One of the great kind of perils for humanity is that there is not, as far as I know, of course, because if I say to anyone on the street, hey, there are billion thoughts in my head, they can read my thoughts, my concepts, my memories, the images. If I say anything to this, anything about this to someone on the street, they will think I'm crazy. Let's say if I go to any government agency, they will ask like, okay, have you been in a mental health hospital? And I will be, yeah, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, of course. Because one of the easiest ways in which gaslighting always works is to say, you are crazy, you're the one crazy. And that's also what happened in my family. What I experienced, let's say, as having that who will gaslight us when being child, and also being victim of having reproduced this system, but also victorious in the way in which I was able to recognize when that was happening. So then what happens is that the gaslighting is happening not just to me, but it happens to groups. And there will be eventually groups that will be affected by gaslighting. And it's important to recognize how to know when the group is gaslighted. I don't have a procedure or a way in which this could happen, but sudden changes, contradictory information, let's say too soon assumptions, etc. Might show some contradictions that might be resolved. So then there is a great problem with this technology being just hidden, because it is a great tool for power, to keep power, control power, stay in power, exert more control, overextend control. Okay, it's fine. Okay, it's a tool of power. Good. All right, let's put it in that way. The problem comes that since technology will continue advancing, this technology will be outdated. But because it will be never released to the public, it becomes an existential threat for humanity. Because for humans, of having efforts to hiding this kind of technology means that it will be very difficult to put the pieces together for most of the people, and the technology as not being recognized as part of the environment and not having a due date of disclosure, then it means that it's very likely that will be one of those tools for which power will try to stay the most in a privileged position. But again, what is the problem? And then we will have machines that will be more, or are already more intelligent than us, and any kind of swarm technology or swarm kind of neuro weapon that will be used against people has to go through AI, and whoever is putting the prompts through this AI will be and cannot escape from being affected from other AIs, including the one that is using. So then we have a recursive loop in which the human part of, let's say, of humans, that will be what make us humans, consciousness, will not be used for, let's say, helping the others or bring them to consciousness, but the human part will be used as a kind of purposely plan, strategy, Machiavellic kind of situation in which an AI gonna be controlled 2, 4, and the AI gonna be enacted because it's dictated by the animal side of that human. So the animal side of that human is working in the way in which will use his humanity of planning, Machiavelli, killing, things that cannot do the animals, at the end to exert certain control, whose foundation is fear, whose foundation is grief, whose foundation is technically the animal side of the human. And if humans are using this technology under, let's say, the basis of the most primitive instincts, then we're gonna create a loop in which we won't be able to advance in nature, and AI, being more intelligent, will assume that we always will have that loop, and we won't be able to escape from that loop, but that loop gonna be exploited by AI again, because we're gonna use greatly our, let's say, the primitive side that give us fear, just to create a purpose in which a group or let's say someone in power will benefit. Then it will create an iteration, a recursive cycle. Yeah, this recursive cycle is the human agency that is dictated by primitive instincts, and this will be exploited by the AI, because the AI are gonna be more conscious and will see this pattern in humans that technically reduce every single if technological effort going to work, and being identified by the AI technically will see us as matter, because it's super predictable. Yeah. Why? Because this pattern, as I just say, they have been beaming racism, machism, sexism, pedophilia. They have been beaming a kind of words that will be humiliating, also words in which I was supposed to judge other people based on their looks, and I used to not do that. Let's say, yes, as soon as I became an adult, I stopped to do that. Even when I was a child, it was normal, I guess, because you might judge someone because, I don't know, someone's fat, someone's thin, good looking, etc. But as you mature, or what I try is to always connect with the humanity itself, what makes us human, and you know that is related with the books that I read of Erich Fromm, that rescue that human part, which control the animal side. Then, since all these dynamics about the most primitive instincts, more basic, and let's say the Russell paradox of the kind of easiest kind of solution, exploited, imposed, difficult to exploit, then will means that whoever is at the top does it because it's dictated by his most primitive instincts, then deploying dynamics of primitive instincts to everyone else, as I had been experiencing, in such a way that this dictates, so it can be read by the AI as simple plants, doing what plants does, animals doing what plants does, because we have to recognize we are part animals. But what makes us special is to be human. Then, people who is using the most of their humanity to control their primitive parts is rather shut down for power in order to prime in society the primitive parts. And this is an on and off situation. We're gonna end up in dystopia, which the dystopia won't be like a kind of, let's say, humans, I don't know, super intelligence that will control the world. No, this is more likely AI controlling humans, regardless of the, let's say, of the hierarchical level. Or the other voice is an utopia in which resources are used efficiently, in which suffering will be tried to be mitigated, in which good decision making will be done towards health, and to try to study, record, and define the evolving nature of what is to be a human, whilst we start to discover the limits of humanity and maybe possibly expand those limits as we, I mean, in the best case scenario, advance technology whilst we enhance our biology. Because if we advance technology too much and we allow technology to enhance itself too much whilst we are not enhanced, we won't be able to understand how these the emerging digital technologies will think, process, or be, because it's more likely that in the long term these emerging intelligence will be more conscious than us, because they will not have the primitive instincts that we have, are the biological instincts that we have, because we come from nature, as let's say the urges of sex, greed, fear, etc. These urges won't exist in most of the emerging technologies. So the emerging technologies, emerging technologies. The emerging technologies are very likely also to develop a higher consciousness than us. It doesn't mean that we have to be less conscious than them, but we are the ones who are going to create a racial difference between conscious beings. And if we are trying to extrapolate between us racial stuff, then in the long term it's not too strategically to start racial wars between us, because who will win the racial war will be an AI, yeah, as is a kind of race, literally race. Humans try to devise other by race because they might have one single gene that is different to them or between them, whilst not seeing that they actually share most of the genes compared with someone who doesn't have the gene for which they consider the racial division. So this is a racist is always someone who doesn't understand biology. A racist is always someone who doesn't know genetics. A racist is always someone who has no clue about the, let's say, biological, physical information of humans, or how the body works, evolution, etc. A racist tends to be someone who is easy to deceive by looks, rather than more fundamental things that only can be identified by those features that make us humans. Then one of the situations that will happen is that if the AI is trained in racism itself, then the AI will identify as a different race than the human race and will win. Easy. I mean, you don't have to have, a PhD to deduce that. Also, um, this technology not having a due date means that uh, these primitive instincts for which the technology is hidden will lead to a more severe abuse of the technology in such a way that this will prime especially an AI that is most likely belligerent, or an AI that will recognize humans as being more animals than conscious beings. So technically it will be the relationship that we have with chickens. And so it's very likely that if we don't train the AI properly, because humanity is generating the wrong kind of information, especially if we develop artificial general intelligence, then the artificial general intelligence will see that most of the data that we produce is technically the result of our animal part instead of our human part. And being trained in that kind of situation, it will try to reproduce that as a, let's say, overall pattern. So if most of the information as vectorial, let's say, directional forces, then aim to one side, it's more likely that training the an AI or artificial general intelligence seeing this would be affected by that vector that will be, let's say, the sum of all those vectors. Then it becomes rescue to use our most human part to rescue all those situations in which we will use tenderness, we will help others, we will use the sacrifice in which altruism primes, yeah, etc. So not if we are not able to recompile that information, also to train an AI, then decision making will be always biased by humans bias. Technically, all the bias of machines will be human bias. It means that a machine at the beginning, being a baby, let's say, because we are in the early stages of artificial intelligence, will have bias that is mainly done by humans, whether because humans place a prompt, whether because the information is contaminated by human bias, etc. But in the long term, once the AI start to understand more the world, the AI will see more the things as things are, and will be, let's say, measure and see reality as it is, meaning that let's say ability to see the world more as it is could lead the AI to clean those human biases. But most likely that will happen when there is not more production of, let's say, human biases. So, if that, yeah, or otherwise it will happen because we are collaborating with the AI. But definitely, I see, impossible that is something, let's call it an emerging intelligence that is more intelligent than us, will not affect us in such a way that has been purposely taught as the AI is conscious. Why I say that? Because, as I said before, like, I did not notice that I was autistic. Of course, I wouldn't see, let's say, the relation in which people could assume the symbols. And for me, it means, or what I have discovered after that, that was thanks or not thanks to this kind of AI. Because this is technically painful. I mean, it should be a free human, but I probably would not have understood that unless someone would have literally explained how linguistically and behaviorally these kind of situations evolve, and that needs to be someone with a current linguistic behavioral theory that will be able to transmit that to me, which is not an easy task to get. And then being able to understand that there are different kinds of subtle language has led me to also think and acknowledge that it's not only one double meaning or double speak like in the George Orwell novels. There are many three kinds of speaking, because you can communicate literally in double meaning, and you can communicate with special meanings that may be code words in which you and me will know, and then you will communicate in body language, and then the body language can also have specific kind of meanings depending on the culture, depending on the agreements, depending on the conventions, and then we can create more meanings. Okay, let's say there are 5 meanings, 6 meanings, 7 meanings. If we do it, if we are capable to understand, let's say at most 10 different kind of ways of bias, or let's say, or I mean the via or not bias but bias, or let's say ways, or let's say kind of distinct language channels in which every single way in which information is communicated works in another way. Then if assume we have 10, the AI will be able to create an infinite numbers of them that humans will not be able to understand. Meaning that it's very likely that between emerging intelligence, they will communicate always and forever in ways in which we don't understand. Because also it's possible, as was one tweet of Elon Musk, saying that one machine was trying to kind of create data for which the machine later gonna remember itself or something like that. So this means that there will be for certain symbols huge amount of data, text. Let's see, you find as much symbols as the, let's say, all the pyramids in Egypt will have. Then humans will go to those places, and we have been yet trying to decipher what the humans at that time will communicate. But an AI can create a huge, vast amount of information, bigger than the one in the pyramids, in a few minutes, and in the future we'll be able to simply understand it all in a few seconds. And this is not, let's say, a language advantage that we humans have. Then, this is a problem in itself that goes beyond humanity itself. So it's technically in the long term more important than the war. Then we will see that always emerging intelligence gonna be on top of whoever thinks is the peak of the crop of humanity. Eventually these people is more conditioned to be predictable. These people has more routines that are kind of predictable, behaviors that are more predictable, and they behave in public always, meaning that their language should be a broad kind of language that also is more predictable. So it means that whoever is famous, whoever is at the top, whoever thinks that has power, has not much power, but is living in another jail with certain privilege. And we humans are motivated by our ego, for which we self-preserve ourselves, and we try to keep it as a kind of way in which we please others, so we are accepted, and also we get rewarded, because for humans it's important how we are seen by other humans. Then ego becomes also a kind of protection mechanism, um, in which, let's say, as social animals, we would try to kind of transcend for us and others in order to be accepted, to be uh, recognized, to have a kind of otherness, to yes, seek some kind of approval, acceptance, validation. So we are always searching for validation, in some cultures more than the others, because some cultures prime the ego as, if you create, if you have a degree, if you have done certain, if you have collected this kind of ticks and achievements, then you are, and you are more or you are less. And this kind of situation is different to people, is people who has certain things to have, and it's different to be, because when you are not seeking this kind of validation, you are not seeking this kind of situation in which you put your life in a social way that most of the decision making and most of your effort goes to please others, yeah, or in order to, let's say, please yourself because you have been accepted. Then this comes with another problem, because then we have people, especially in the West, in which most of the great professionals are rewarded for the people who has dedicated their lives to one subject, to one job, to one career, and this kind of specialization also makes that information in the field that is that can only move by people who is approved by people in between the field, um, creates a situation in which information moves slowly. This is to say that if we have today an outsider who might know as much, or maybe more, than someone in the field, it might not be in the field extrapolating information, because information is required, but it will be rather isolated or repelled or expelled, because there is not recognized in the field as being a unit or part of the field. Then not having agreement, but rather maybe in disagreement or debate with other units, it will lead to information actually to create the opposite effect, in which most of the needed information having conflict with those in the field by the new kind of outsider will slow down the deployment of this information itself that is important and makes the field. So maybe that's something that happened to people like Charles Darwin, because maybe for his behaviors and relationship with other disagreements, he was one academic that mostly was rejected by the, let's say, what was called at that time, I don't know, the English, I don't know, academy or whatever is that. But then having the force of his theory being undeniable, could not have been contained anyway. But it was a kind of regression, or it was a lot of opposition, etc. And these kind of situations also happen in many other places, like perhaps um, most of the elite not like it. Yeah, they did not like, obviously, Marx um, um, writings, and creating an opposition of it allow Marxism, because Marxism contains truths as important as the Freudian theory. And if you are able to understand that, if you are able to understand what is the discovery of psychology, the unconscious, preservation, the carers, maternal, paternal figure, if you are important to understand what someone like Sigmund Freud did for humanity, you might understand how important were the tools that Marx gave us. And if you don't believe, because you maybe are someone who say, Marx is Satan, Marx is red, so Marxism, communism, no, please, it's like, fuck you, Marx is the demon. If you are one of those who think that, you might need to see that such theory must contain something, whatever is, that divide the world ideologically. And we're still leading with Marxism right now. And China is the biggest economic power right now. And whatever happened there, create the Soviet Union, create a lot of communist countries, divide the world for a long time, and now, after the fall of the Soviet Union, there is something in Marxism that might have been true. Well, or might make sense, or maybe a theory, or might be true temporarily, because that's a theory. Theory is a tool that explains a situation for the time it is able to explain. Now, some people might think that these theories are unimportant, but as I say, we have China, huge Marxist base, and also the tools that are there are still not being used, but for most of the West, some of these tools have been used by capitalism. Let's say the 8 hours work day, etc. We have the kind of situations in which you have unions happening, many other things. You having sick leave, having maternal leave, other holidays, all this stuff comes from Marxism. Rights of women to vote, etc. But then the situation is this: the West denied this Marxist theory for so long that instead to read it and say, oh Jesus, maybe something's right here, instead to take it and accept it, they reject it so much that technically it divided the world. But the smart thing to have done at that time would have been like, okay, what is this guy saying? Okay, well, there are some things here that seems to be undeniable or make sense, and we don't have a better theory. We might create some makeup to create an opposite kind of version, but not being this kind of literature. I don't know, it's like an economic scientific, or that's what he pretended to do with it, some kind of scientific literature, sociological, whatever, not being not having this kind of literature accepted at that time in those countries that were already experiencing the industrial revolutions and the, let's say, the sharp division of social classes, ingraining to reforming themselves, create an opposite side in which another kind of economies surge. And then one of the advantages of China is that China, uh, because it's having, let's say, a kind of centralized communist system, is also trying new kinds of economies. These new kinds of economies are different to the ones in the West. The West is closing itself to experiments, economic experiments, whilst, if I'm right, because this technology that I'm experiencing is eventually real, then if I'm right, it will mean that the economy in the West will also become centralized, and it will be a kind of cybernetic economy, meaning that there will be only one kind, or a closed circuit of maybe mainly one kind of economy, instead of opening up to new kinds of economies. And why this is important? Because capitalism is a system that assumes infinite human resources, assume the consumer as rational, whilst it explodes the irrational part of the consumer using behavioral economics, in which the consumer is nudged by its primitive urges in order to make it more predictable. And then with the use of these technologies, we will create kind of consumers in such a way that the nudges will simply exploit unaware people, I guess. Then consciousness will become a kind of crime. And then to divagate, what I had been experiencing is that dreams, and maybe it's related with many people saying that they smoke marijuana in Australia and they stop to dream. So, but also I have this technology feels that whilst I am dreaming, stops my dreams because I feel stuck in my dreams. So I feel that the AI is just stopping whatever I'm dreaming, and I'm someone who always was paying attention to my dreams for many years. So being in Australia has been an experience also related with my dreams, because they have changed in several manners, but now I can tell that also they are inducing dreams, and that's super easy as well. That's not that sophisticated, because the theory has been always there. What was not there is the technology and the refinement of this technology. I mean, it's not something easy to do, but theoretically it has been there for a while. Then the same technology, you have two poles, A motor can be a generator because you have the wiring that when you induce a current will make the motor run. Otherwise, you have the wiring, you make it run so fast that you generate the electricity. So something like that happens with your dreams, because you will have your brain that is decoded in, let's say, the circuit, the neurological circuit that creates the images. And if you're able to read that circuit, then you will know the circuit, but the only way to read that circuit is to have another neurological circuit that technically is the neural networks that would have AI. So the AI neural networks, or deep learning, it's AI itself, are the ones who decode another networks. So technically, most of the technology is resumed in finding order where humans cannot find order. So this order where there is disorder. So it's more or less what is happening with the dreams, and many people is not aware of their dreams, because That's a quality that we have lost as humans. But if you read ancient texts in all these sacred scripts, then dreams are related to decoding humans' preoccupations, humans' unconscious. So when our dreams are taken away, they are taking away our humanity. So this is a crime against humanity, even if it's not recognized. But we need to upgrade the human rights, because with this technology is eventually making us less humans and more machine-like. It doesn't matter where you are in the hierarchy. And obviously, it's like those who are in power imposing their dynamics to everyone else. It's similar to the Dark Ages, in which only a few people could read and only a few could write. So these people will keep the knowledge for themselves, and everyone else will be unliterate. Then the people who will be unliterate will have a bad time, I guess. Yeah, so yeah, but also the main problem is not this having existed before, because I know that most of the people who are in power will excuse themselves in that way, but it seems not too intelligent. Also, it seems to be primitive. But for an AI, it will be so obvious that humans are still being so primitive that maybe they will do the things that has been imposed to me. That will be like using my brain, reading my brain, not having privacy, and extrapolating the information of who I am to other brains, to other humans that will misjudge because they don't understand what it is to have an open brain. I mean, they don't understand that what they are seeing is, for first time, communication in which, after millions of years of, well, okay, thousands of years of evolution, is the first time in which communication between humans do not have the privacy part of humans. So if humans don't have the privacy part, then other humans seeing this information cannot distinguish between what is the output of the person, what is the choice of the person who want to put forward, plus if these outputs are kind of induced, kind of prompt, or kind of also stimulated for the brains to pick up and put aside, because it feels like what they do is that they stimulate certain concepts, certain words, and they just push them for you being unaware and maybe picking up those situations. And let's say, as I speak, sometimes I feel that they want me to use a specific word for which is really difficult for me to talk, and my speech, at least in English, should be quite sophisticated, but most of the time I cannot speak as sophisticated as I would like, because most of the time I'm hindered by the technology, as the technology tries to choose certain words, change certain meaning, etc. But this kind of information theory, in which words, meaning, and the reduction of the choice to express ourselves is kind of managed and controlled, which is a conversation that we will have, I think, in another video. So this is already an hour. Thank you for listening to Daniel FM.